Make me your vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine. Sing that again. Make me a vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, bring new wine. It means we're getting back on the altar. We're saying we surrender everything, Lord. Bring new wine out of me. Jesus, Jesus, bring new wine. God out of me. Jesus, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power. There is new freedom. The kingdom is here. I lay down my old frames to carry your new fire today. Where there is new wine, 'cause where there is new wine, there is new power. There is new freedom. And the kingdom is here. I lay down my old frames to carry your new fire today. So we sing, make me a vessel. Make me an offering. You want me to be. I came here with nothing but all you have given me. Jesus.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Brian, are we, what's up there? Are we good to go?
Yes, can hear you guys. We can see you guys. Good to go.
Okay, so thanks, Brian. If you see anything going amiss or slides not showing or anything like that, then just let us know. Hang on, Brian, I still have, I can't screen share yet. Brian, hello, anyone there?
Yeah, give it a bash now. It's working.
Ah, there we go.
How's
Perfect.
that looking?
Excellent. You can
All
see.
good? And there are no grey things on the...
No grey boxes on the screen. Looking good. Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Excellent.
Cool. Hello, everybody. So we just want to start off in prayer, and then we'll kick off. Big night tonight. So, Lord, we just thank you for your incredible goodness to us and the fact that you don't leave us alone, and in all things you give us insight and wisdom and the way forward. And so my prayer is for everybody who's listening tonight, including myself, having to listen to myself. My prayer is that we would hear exactly what the Spirit knows we need for our parenting. And if there's anything, Lord, that you call on for me to emphasize or to leave out, just pray for that sensitivity. But most of all, Lord, we just pray that everything is said tonight honors you, because you are the best. Amen.
Amen.
So there we go. We are starting our fourth session tonight, and we're really looking forward to it. We've Sheila and I have discussed it a lot, and we really feel there's a lot of here that's been incredibly helpful for us in our journey of parenting, and so it's a privilege to be able to share it with you. So what we want to do is have a quick recap of what we spoke of last week and even the week before, just as a platform for tonight. And in all things to do with the disciplining of our children, which really reflects the desire to shape their hearts and to mold their hearts, we want to know what is going on in their hearts. So that's really the core question, and we you had homework that you were doing last week and all the rest of it, but there's a lot to be thought about or to understood in this. And the first thing is your child in a state of rebellion, where they are fundamentally sort of going against your wishes, your voice, or something like that? That's a key piece of knowledge to know in all of your parenting. And the more skill you get and the more discernment you get per child, because of course some children hide it well, whereas others don't, it's a key to know what's going on. Another one is to know are they being reckless, which really would be more about immaturity, irresponsibility, being influenced by their peers, having slip-ups in a sense, momentary slip-ups. It's a very different state of heart. It may look the same on the outside, the symptoms may look exactly the same, but as a parent, it's a key discernment to be able to separate out rebellion from recklessness. And then the last one is restlessness, which really refers to their state of physical being, where they might be very tired or lonely or very emotional. And so you get a negative behavior, for example, but it's not really a matter of the heart. It's more because they're just in an absolute state. And your style of parenting will differ significantly when you look across these three options. And like all things that we're going to speak about tonight and in previous sessions, where we sort of box things and make it look all neat and tidy, we must know we're dealing with real people, and we are real people in ourselves, and often the edges between these are very significantly blurred. So don't get too caught up in the classification systems and the boxing and being absolutely rigid and saying, well, it must be this, it must be that. There is a grayness between these things, but you do the best you can. But we ended off last week saying that the key to parenting is knowing what rebellion looks like, because if there's one thing you really want to get right in your parenting is managing a state of rebellion, which will come in your children in various ways, and you need to tackle it head on. Irrespective of whether it's packaged in a cute smile or not, you do need to tackle it as rebellion. So that was a very important sort of precursor to everything we say about discipline. And then we spoke about this issue of obedience and the need for obedience, and we started to talk about it, communication and consistency. And tonight we're going to speak about consequences, and there's even a fourth one that we're wanting to add, which is choices. And all of these are sort of steps towards helping your children achieve a state of obedience, which is where they would happily obey you because of a good state of heart. It's really the direct opposition of rebellion, where they don't want to obey you in the slightest, and almost irrespective of what you're asking them to do, they're going to try and reject your input or your requests or your instructions. So obedience is quite an important aspect that we've tried to focus on last week. And I just want to recap a couple of aspects of it. And the first one is on the communication. we spoke and we speak ad nauseum about it, so couch time, being in unity. But then the next thing is actually telling your children what you expect of them. This is absolutely a foundation for everything we're going to go into tonight and into later sessions, is this mindset that you are your child's instructor, their parent. You're the one that has to teach them everything that you know about the world and the ways of the world, and good and bad, and what's right and what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral. You are the primary source. And I know there are aspects of schooling systems that can pick up on some of this, but the primary responsibility lies with the parents to be the ones who instruct their children. And so I would go so far as to say that if you're not doing this, if you're not doing this step of actually, before any discipline is happening, if you're actually not speaking to your children and teaching them about these things, it almost disqualifies you from doing anything we're going to talk about tonight.
Because this sets your children up for success if you are able to instruct them on your expectations. Because I said last week how important expectations are in a relationship. And we do our children a disservice if we don't communicate our expectations, because how are they supposed to know?
So this is very much a proactive moment. It's out of conflict. It's long before you in any sort of real parenting sort of crisis. It's done, very much out of conflict. So we spoke a little bit about it. For example, you can set up intentional moments, what we called Milo time moments, which were happy moments where you would explain your heart on a certain matter. I would suggest doing it in very bite-sized chunks. Don't give your sort of entire rendition on the philosophies of life in one sort of mouthful. It might be a little indigestible, but take one issue that you think is important, that you're wanting to see in your kids, one character issue or one problem area, and you teach on it. And so those are intentionally created moments. But very often you'll have random moments where you just have a sudden access into your child's heart. They ask you a question, you're driving in the car somewhere, and a moment arrives, and you sort of back up the truck at that point and unload as much instruction and teaching and out of conflict guidance as you can without laboring the point. In these times, I think it's really important that there's a couple of things you're trying to achieve. One of them is explaining morality. In other words, sharing as best you can your heart on why something is right or wrong. And it can be around any level of behavior. So if we'll talk, actually, we have a whole session on this in coming weeks, but a very simple example would be, if you are requiring your children to eat in a sort of vaguely civilized way at the dinner table, there should be a moral reason behind it that you are able to articulate to them and explain to them. And out of that, you would agree on the boundaries. You would say, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And you would agree on the consequences if there is a transgression and somebody steps out of those boundaries. And so that's all very helpful to do out of conflict. It's very difficult to do in conflict when there's emotion and everybody's grumpy and not liking each other. So you want to try and set up those moments or make the most of them. The next one is if you've got younger children in particular, we find it very, very helpful to do role playing, where you literally, you can set up a little situation and sort of help this is in the 2 to 5 year old bracket, I guess, and really help them see what you want to say.
So for example, if you want to show them how you're going to greet people and your expectation, then what you would do is do a role play. And we would used to do this with our children. So we'd set it up, and one of them would pretend they're the visitor, and then I would pretend I was a child, and then I'll role play how I would do it well and not well. And then they would laugh and laugh and laugh at me because I would act like a bit of a clown. And then I'd get them to do it and say, okay, now you're going to pretend. And then you get another child to pretend to be the visitor. And they have a whole big game. And it's so effective for younger children. You can do it if you're having an issue with the way they're eating at the table. You can, as mom and dad, slouch and eat with your mouth open and pick your nose and do whatever you don't want them to do. And they think it's hilarious. And then you say, okay, now this is how you should do it. So let's try, and you make it into a game.
And by making it fun and exciting, it's not a conflict moment in the slightest, and you actually have a much greater doorway into their hearts. Now you might have noticed, of course, that this all takes a fair bit of time, and that is actually a reality, is that there's no shortcut to this. This
Yeah.
requires time with your children. And like I said it when I started off this concept, this is a qualifier to be strict. If you sort of imagine yourself having well-disciplined children, in other words, they've got good character and they're responsive and whatever moral, however you're seeing them when you want to see them when they're grown up, the reality is this is the foundation, is you sharing your heart in advance out of conflict. And it's probably one of the greatest investments you'll make in your parenting is this step. It's not to be trivialized in any way. And as we go into the next sort of this whole of tonight, which is really about the variety of tools you can use to shape your children's heart, this is all premised. You understand you really can't go into that if you're not doing this thing. So it's really important. Okay, so what we wanted to talk about tonight is training tools for shaping the hearts of our children. And it's again very important to remember, right back to one of those early principles we spoke about on night one, is that we are always aiming to shape our children's heart. These are not tools for having well-behaved children. Quite frankly, it's almost irrelevant how good or badly behaved your children are, other than to recognize that's a symptom of something. And a bad behavior is a symptom of something. So you can achieve behavior correction in many ways, but if you haven't reached their heart, it has no sticking power. And the moment they step outside of your, however strictly imposed boundaries, you may not have won their hearts. So we have a section on behavior, working with children's behavior when they're very much younger as a mechanism to get to their heart, but the goal is always to shape their hearts.
And just to state the obvious, we're not saying to literally use tools, because once we were somewhere and someone thought we meant tools, it's not that.
Yeah, so okay, so just to speak a little bit about these tools in general, some of them are proactive. In other words, you're going to use them before you're in a moment of parenting trouble, if you want to call it that, a parenting moment. They are used in advance, and others are you're in reaction. So there's a bit of a balance there that you're going to have to work out. If you remember right back to the beginning again, the principle is you really want the majority of your parenting to be proactive as much as possible. So you're always going to have some reaction, and with some children you have a lot more reaction, and that's just the reality of it. But as far as you can make it, you want to be ahead of the game and ahead of your children's, in a sense, bad behavior. So the reality is all of our children have areas of weakness and areas where they're going to fall into sort of trouble. And if we can be proactive, in a sense, recognizing that and ahead of the game, then it's very, very helpful. Okay, and just a note on that. So you'll see we've got little symbols like the green tick, for example, and the reactive sign. These are going to come through the tools just to, in a sense, help guide you see where they fit into the picture. So it's not a crisis if you can't remember all of them, but there they are. So some of the tools are natural. In other words, they just happen in life. In other words, if you are running, okay, we're going to explain it in a moment. Yeah. And others are imposed. In other words, you're the one who brings about the consequence, and you want to use both. They're both very helpful. And I just want to start off looking at the first one, and you're looking at a picture of one of our sons who was warned. We said to him, don't play near the edge of the bank because you might fall down. And in our hearts, it's not a dangerous situation. It was like a 3-meter tumble, but it was on soft grass and there was nothing sort of too risky in the whole thing. So this boy, being well endowed with willful character, immediately chose to play exactly on the boundary line of where he was not allowed to really be, and promptly tumbled down the bank. And
this was his face when he came out.
We didn't move. We just waited for the howl to slowly get closer and closer. And I mean, he clearly wasn't damaged in any way, but he was outraged, and it's a natural consequence. In other words, you just let life play out, even if it's a negative thing, a painful process. There's once you've ascertained there's no like major blood loss or broken limbs, there's limited sympathy required in a moment like this.
Another example would be if your child leaves their sports kit at home, and you had warned them the night before to pack their bag and get their cricket things together. And because they were dawdling at breakfast time, they screamed out, got into the car and left it. A natural consequence would be then they just can't play cricket that afternoon, rather than us as parents rushing around driving to school, giving them the thing, because they learn the hard way.
So, and it's not always negative. I mean, there's some very pleasant natural consequences. In other words, if you are in a bus and you get up for an older person and they sit down and they greet you and thank you, you feel the warm affirmation of your conscience and the Holy Spirit saying, well done, that was a good thing. And so a child's good behavior will also have natural consequences, often in a very relational aspect, and it's helpful to actually show them that in time. But we will maybe come back to that a little bit more. And then very clearly some are negative or painful consequences, and others are pleasant or positive. So in all of these things, we're going to be trying to sort of show you want to have a nice balance of all of these tools through your parenting journey. I want to speak a little bit about pain. So pain is an essential part of life. It really, really is an essential part of life. It's not always a physical pain, but pain in itself is an extremely helpful thing for you in your life. So what that means is that, for example, if you didn't feel pain, you would get yourself physically into a lot of trouble very quickly. You would injure yourself. I have a good friend who's got a very serious diabetic condition, and he at one stage of his life lost feeling in his feet, and he couldn't feel pain, and he stood on a rusty nail in the garage, literally through his foot, and didn't feel it, and walked around with it, and got such terrible blood poisoning from that particular moment that he almost lost his leg. So the point being, though, is that pain is an incredibly necessary warning symptom in your life. If you really want it, and yet so much of our life is around trying to reduce pain and suffering. We hate it, but yet we need it so much. And but when it comes to training of the heart, pain has a way of, in a sense, fixing something in a child's mind, or even in your mind as an adult. You know what I mean? If you imagine you were somebody with you were prone to speeding. Take an easy example, which many of us are, except if you own a Mahindra Bucky like me and it doesn't speed. But if you are prone to speeding and then one day you get caught and you get whacked with a 20 or 30 grand fine, every aspect of that moment will be rigidly fixed on your mind and would shape something in your heart. You may be so hardened that it doesn't, but particularly with younger, more pliant hearts, children, there's something about a painful moment, whether it be a natural or physical, imposed or emotional pain, that they will remember it. I mean, I think if you were to think back to some of the most painful, physically painful moments of your life, you could probably replay a video in your mind of exactly what happened in that moment. I can remember the first time I touched a very powerful electric fence. I could describe it for you if you had the time and willingness to listen to me. It would be, I could give you every single detail of that moment because it's fixed in my mind. And that's, in a sense, what pain is a necessary part of it. So we mustn't be afraid of, as parents, to be afraid of pain for our children. It's not a bad thing, and in some cases, it's a very natural consequence of rebellion. In other words, you may give good advice to your children, and they ignore it, and they end up in a very painful. It could be emotionally painful, it could be physically painful, whatever it might be. And at that point, as I say, we can't make that pain go away, and it's not right that we would, because it's part of life's learning processes. What we're wanting to do is to take you on a journey of our toolbox, if I can put it like that, helping you see firstly, just to give you a sketch of all the tools and to see the approximate place where they could be used in your parenting. And then we will unpack each of the tools in a little bit more detail so that you can see how it all sort of fits together. And just to remind you, this is not a perfect classification. It's just... And
not an exhaustive classification either.
Some of you might have some other great ideas, and you are welcome to let us know about them. Right, so what we find is you get to a situation where, or not before you get into a situation, in other words, before life happens, there are a couple of tools which we're going to pick up on. So we've all of this is built on that whole proactive conversation of instruction, where you've taught your children a whole lot of things. It's making this
unity
assumption.
between you if you're married.
And if you're married, you've had those couch time conversations. So this would be a journey that is applied to one area of parenting. For example, let's say you've chosen to work on anger in a child, or a lack of kindness, or whatever it might be. So there's a whole foundation of instruction where you've gone through some proactive stuff already, and then leading up to the moment, there's some time that will be spent in encouraging your children into this, and we'll talk about what that means. You may have some reminders of the incentives and the consequences, which we'll talk about, and there may be some warnings. So this is, once again, it's
before the child is transgressed.
Yeah, or it's before you're going into a parenting moment. So, for example, we would often do this going somewhere. If we were going to go and visit friends or grandparents, or going to church, or whatever it might be, or to the shops, where you're anticipating, in a sense, life happening, a life moment, some parenting moment is probably going to take place, and this is what proactive parenting looks like. You don't just wait for it to happen, you get in there early. So we'll unpack what each one of those things might be. And then you go through a little bit of a journey, and then you've got some moments of life. And you might have to now, in a sense, be reacting to something that's gone down. So there's some timeout, there's isolation, there's admonishment, loss of privilege, there's chastisement, and then there's natural consequences. Most of these are negative, neutral or negative. In other words, you are generally at this point responding to bad behavior in your children, and it's a symptom of what's going on in their hearts. So you do need to parent it. But it doesn't stop there, and then you go through a process of once the emotion of life, in a sense, has happened, and there's a bit of an afterlife moment after that thing when everybody's under control again and the trauma's over. Now there are some other things you can do. So we talk about these: debriefing, affirmation, admonishment again, and random rewards. So this is a package of tools, as I say, not exhaustive, but it's a lot that we can talk about. So what we want to do is start off on the first one, the first group, what happens before life happens.
And when we're saying life happens, we're meaning a parenting moment. For example, you go into the shops and you know your child's going to ask for a chocolate in the sweet aisle. So this is before you go to the shops. This is what you would do before life happens.
Okay, but I think before I jump into that thing, there's one more point I want to make, is that you'll look at all of these tools, and there were however many on the screen, I think 11 or 12, and I want you to make I want you to remember that these are not an escalation of tools. They're a toolbox. So in other words, just like if you have a plumbing problem, you don't just start on one side of your workbench sort of tool collection and randomly try things, in a sense, eventually escalating to the massive monkey wrench, that can sort of fix anything. It's not like that. I think many parents view the toolbox as saying, okay, well, right, that's it. You've caused me so much irritation. We're going to escalate to the next tool and escalate to the next tool. It's not the way to view it. These are tools that are applied specifically for different scenarios of parenting, and for different types of children, because not all of them work equally well on all different types of children. So it's very unhelpful to say, if your child's being rebellious, this is just an example, you might say, well, there's a loss of privilege the moment they are rebellious. You're not waiting for the third time they're rebellious, and you've tried warning them and you've tried admonishing them, and then, well, that didn't work. Right, that's it. Now I'm really angry, and now we're going to go to loss of privilege, as if it was this sort of upping your game, the nuclear sort of Cold War. It doesn't work like that. Okay. So the key is consistency. You really want to be, whatever tools you decide to apply to a situation, And this is what you're going to take what we teach, and you're going to discuss it as parents, or as a single parent, you're going to make your decisions on this. And then you just have to be consistent. The moment that thing happens, you just bring out that tool, and it's relatively simple. Right. Okay. So the first one is encouragement, and it's again, this is a proactive moment. It's a verbal conversation, and it focuses on the good that you desire to see in your children. So you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got BLH. That means before life happens, a little acronym. So encouragement really is about, if you go right back to that principle that I spoke at the beginning of the sessions, is that if you're not planting anything, then you're not going to harvest anything. That's the principle. If you take the garden analogy and you're trying to, if you have in mind this beautiful garden that's going to come about to be all fruitful and productive, if you never plant any vegetables or trees or whatever it is that you want, don't be disappointed if you don't get a harvest. And if your parenting can be a whole life's journey, of weeding all the stuff you don't want to see, but if you never plant, you never get a harvest, and you never break out the cycle of weeding. So this is encouragement, is really building something in your children that you're wanting to see. You're going to verbalize what you want to see in your children. And so what it looks like is it focuses on the good character and the behavior you want to see. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you're working on the issue of kindness now, where you are trying to get a child who's not really very strong in this area to be kind to their siblings, for example. So that you might have some reminders and appreciations of past successes. If there's one thing that you can just remember from when they once randomly were nice to their younger brother, you harp on it. You go back to the thing and say, "No, I just love that about you. I love the way when you said that kind thing to your younger brother, or you shared your toy, whatever it might be, and you elevate the good. You focus on the good thing that you and appreciate the past success." And you can also probe their thinking with questions. You might ask them questions, or how do you think it makes somebody feel when you're kind to them? Don't focus on the negative. Don't say how do you think it feels when you're unkind? And you almost, in a sense, your whole tone might change, because and you may lose your window into the child's mind and their heart. But if ask the questions of, like, what do you think it will be like if you imagine when your friends are kind to you? How do you think of it like this? And you just try and get them to imagine what it's like to be like that. And but always focusing and speaking out, verbalizing what you're wanting to see, in the sense, planting what you're wanting to see in your children. And you can do this for any moment in life. This doesn't have to be a like once-off thing, like once a month that you sort of do this. You can take all of life moments and turn them into moments of encouragement, of where you're saying what you want to see in your children, and you're constantly speaking over them words of life. That's really what we're saying, is that you're constantly verbalizing the beautiful characteristics that may be embryonic in your children's lives. You don't yet see them, but you know they have the potential to be there, and you speak it into being, and you verbalize it to them, and you, in a sense, you love your children with words, building them up. And
what we also do is, whenever we get a compliment from someone, our kids have been somewhere, we always pass that on. We always pass it on. We say, "Well, you guys were there the other day, and so said to me the following," and just say, "We're so proud of you, just the way you were." Particularly character. When someone else points out good character, we immediately pass it on, and we celebrate. We celebrate good character.
Yeah.
Remember, that's planting instead of weeding.
That's very good. So, as I say, we would often do this in the car, going somewhere in whatever situation we're going into. We would be speaking like this, having these types of conversations with our children. So the next one we want to speak about, and we had a little bit of discussion about it in the questions and answers last week, is incentives. So incentives are there to try to encourage perseverance with good attitude. It's a slightly, in a sense, longer term thing than just a reward. And as I say, it's done proactively. So an incentive is something that is offered in advance. So it really helps those children who cannot see in a long-term benefit. This is often for younger children where you might have vision for your parenting, but they don't. And actually they might just be getting a bit sort of struggling a bit with this whole new way of dealing with parenting. So having a long-term accumulative, I think that's another thing we've got to speak. It's an accumulative achievement. So the concept of a star chart, where you say, right, if you pursue this type of behavior, heart attitude, kindness, or whatever it might be, and every time you demonstrate that to your brother or whatever it might be, you're going to get a star. And then when you get to 10, then there is a benefit. And yeah.
And remember, this is happening way before any transgression has happened.
This is going to happen way before any transgression. In other words, the massive difference between offering an incentive and a bribe is that this is offered long in advance of the moment. This is not an in-the-moment tool. This is proactive. If you are trying to get your children to come to the dinner table and you're offering them pudding, that is a bribe. An incentive is basically focused on character, saying if you do things with good attitude, if you do the dishes with good attitude, then it is going to be accumulated into an agreed on reward.
This is very useful if your child has to perhaps do something that they don't want to do. For example, take medicine that is very unpleasant. An incentive, a star chart works really well. Where they can see they get a star each time they take the medicine that they have to. It tastes horrible because it's really good for them because they need it medically.
Yeah, and we find it very helpful to know and use the currency of your child. So what I mean by that is that the different things stir different children to levels of excitement. So some would love a chocolate, others would love an outing to the zoo, others would go and have a special date with mom or dad, whatever it might be. Just get to know what really stirs your child and then make that the goal of, and don't make the star chart that you've got to earn 250 stars before you get the reward. Especially with younger children and those your intention to create early success. Start with 5 or something achievable, 3 even if it's hard for a child. Rather get to the place where you are celebrating as opposed to correcting. And it's much more effective. And the same thing, this often applies, it's very easy to see when it comes to skills development. So for example, if you're training a child to swim, you might say, and they're a bit nervous of, they have the capacity, but they don't like to get in the pool. So you'd say, right, when you can swim to the other side by yourself, then we're going to go to Ushaka, for example. And you would help them on their journey to get to the other side. And then you've got something to celebrate when they do that. Or if you practice your music enough to the point that you can play this piece flawlessly, then we'll do something, or we get something, or whatever it might be. So we see that concept quite easily when it comes to physical skills, but it really, the same applies for achievement and character. So when you demonstrate willingness to serve and you're offering to help, and you do that, then you get the picture.
And
right.
Incentives can be used in different ways. Some mums will fill a jar with something and then they take it out or put it in. There's so many ways. It doesn't just have to be a star chart. There are lots of ways of using incentives, not just a sticker on a chart.
I remember we used to do at the dinner table, we'd have a bottle of Smarties, and when they were ever when anybody on the table disobeyed the basic rules of eating properly, we took Smarties out of the bottle
And threw them away.
And then so they all became sort of like watching each other. It didn't work that well, but anyway.
We don't recommend that one.
They all became vigorous policemen of each other.
And we suddenly realized how terrible our table
Yeah,
was.
exactly. We were the worst offenders. So, all right, and then another proactive one is warnings. Now, again, just like I made a distinction between incentives and bribes, I want to make a distinction between warnings and threats. A warning is not a threat, because it's a proactive reminder of what has happened beforehand, which obviously implies you've done this. But you've had a Milo time out of conflict moment where you've discussed the moral issues, the reasons why you're pursuing this particular battleground, not that you'd call it that, your expectations and your consequences. But now you would generally want to just remind your children that of something here. And it's generally used proactively when a child is prone to an area of bad behavior or of moral sort of failing or a character weakness, if you want to put it there. They haven't done anything yet, so you're not in reaction to bad behavior. It would be the sort of thing, for example, let's say you're going to the shops and you have a child who's always demanding and wanting sweets from the sweet aisle. So now you've done the whole proactive thing, you've role-played this thing, you've pushed trolleys around your house and done the whole thing in advance. It's all lots of fun. Now you're driving to the shops and you've said to them how you've encouraged them and what you're wanting to see, but you just realize this child needs a little bit of a reminder of what that conversation was. So the best thing to do is ask them to recall it. Don't lecture them again. Just say to them, well, do you remember what we discussed yesterday about going to the shops? And you might have to drag it out of them, but draw it out of them. It's really helpful for them to remember everything. Ask them why do we have to behave like this or be like this? What's going to happen? What is mom's expectations? And what are the consequences? So by the time you arrive at that situation, and especially for those that are weaker in this area, then everybody's clear what's going on.
Particularly as a parent, because I always struggle to this day when I'm not sure if I have warned or been proactive enough, and that's when I dither and I think, oh, it's unfair to issue a consequence because it would be really unfair if they didn't know. So you are actually setting yourself up for success as much as your children by being so proactive, because it's so clear. And then when you do have to go into the time of whatever consequence it is, it can become very unemotional and clinical. It can be very just easy.
Yeah. We found it's always helpful to explain your moral reasoning, which I'm going to not talk about now because we talk about that next week. And I think it's very helpful to use some very real examples, real life examples. So you might say, remember when, and you might be referring to either the last time they really messed this one up and they had to experience the consequence, whatever it was. And you might say, remember that, and how did you feel, and all that. You actually just process life with them, and this can all, as I say, be done in the car or in the few minutes before you're going into a situation. Another good example might be they're going to go play with a friend, and in the past, the friend's younger brother was irritating, and your son lost control, and it just got ugly from there. So now you're going back there to that friend to have another play date. So you might say, remember that last time? I know he's younger than you. He can be a little bit irritating, but your response, and you focus on your son's response, and you unpack it for them, and because they can remember all of that, and you even to the point of actually training them about their emotions and saying, well, how did it make you feel? Well, I felt angry, and then you help unpack them a little bit, and that is everything that we've spoken about. Is before life happens, and just emphasize again the significance of proactive parenting. And like I said at the beginning, I honestly feel that if you're not doing the proactive side of parenting, you are actually disqualified from doing the reactive side, which is often negative. And so, when I made statements in previous sessions to say you actually want to be a strong disciplinarian and actually very strict in your parenting, which may also be in your reactive parenting, it's based on the qualifier that you are being proactive. And so it may require you to retrain yourself as a parent. If you think of your parenting, and this is something you can discuss in your couch times going into this week, if you imagine in your parenting that you are being overly reactive, you're always in a negative reaction to your children's behavior. There may be one or two areas that you need to program yourself, and as I say, choose one or two and go through everything we've talked about. It may seem laborious in the sense that it's taking me a long time to sort of teach all of this, and you're thinking, how on earth are we going to do this over every issue? But it becomes, once you're doing this, it actually becomes very quick, and it just becomes a natural way of interacting with your children, so that everyday moments, everyday life is doing everything we've talked about. It's just flowing out of you. So as I say, we've had to box it and call it things, and we've called it warnings and encouragement and this and that, and so we can talk about it. But actually, it can become a way of life that you don't have to think twice about it. Okay, so let us have a short break, a 10-minute break now. Grab a cup of tea or whatever, and we'll be back at 10 to 8, and we will go into the next portion of the slides. So enjoy yourselves, and we will pick up then. Go. I can't see if people are back again, but we will assume you are seated again, ready for action. Okay, so we spoke everything up until now as a proactive, before life happens, tools in the box. So the next thing we want to look at is what happens when you're in reaction to a life moment, a parenting moment, and life has happened, and what tools are there that you can react with. And so
now, just remember when we spoke about the 4 C's, the first was to communicate, which we said you've got to do. The second was to be consistent. Now, this is the point where you have to be consistent. And this is where you work on consistency, and to try every time, just all the time, be consistent. And whatever you've decided in your unity as a couple, or you if you're a single parent and you've just decided if they do this, the consequence is this, just consistently do that.
Yeah.
It brings stability to the children.
And there's one more, the first one, time out, I want to speak about is a bit of a gray area. And it's what we call a bomb squad moment. And Sheila and I argued about this particular picture. I think it's brilliant. She said it looked like a crab on the beach. But to me, very clearly, all the guys will know this is some guy trying to defuse a bomb in the sand.
I wanted a girl picture.
Anyway, so but the point of it is that there's a tool that we call timeout, which defuses an emerging offense. And something's about to go down. As a parent, you'll know that there's something about to happen, and you intervene to prevent it getting to the point that you have to react to really bad behavior.
And you can see we've got the proactive and the positive sign. So this is actually a positive thing. It's proactive. It's not necessarily a negative thing.
Yeah. And so we're going to come to another tool after this, which we've called isolation, which is reactive. So just to make the distinction, they're actually quite different. They may look similar, but we really want to say they're quite different.
And you'll notice there it says LH toolbox, as Richard. It's life happens toolbox, okay?
Right, so you know,
this is in the moment.
So what you would do, what timeout does, is you're basically going to remove a child from an explosive context and give them space and time to get in control of their emotions before things become unstable. So a very good example would be, so a very good example of this would be if you have siblings that are prone to fighting, for example, or one child that's very prone to anger in a situation, and often anger is in a response to an inability to cope with something, or it's a lash out type response. So let's say, as typically it would happen in a family, mom is sitting there making supper and she's listening to her kids playing, and she hears the temperature rising and words are starting to be said, and in the past that has led to violence. Somebody's hit somebody else, or whatever it might be, and you've had to then step in a sense, and really have to parent quite intensely. And it's often quite negative once you get to that point, and everyone's unhappy. So in a situation like that, it's really helpful for a mom to go into that situation, or a parent to go into that situation and remove the child from that and say, look, And you just quietly walk them out the room. You're not you're not sort of in a sense. There's not a harsh moment in any way. You walk them out the room. You might. We had one child who was very prone to sort of angry outbursts, and we would. It was always with one of their siblings. There was some sort of rivalry between them, and we would walk him out of the situation, and we would take him into his bedroom, and we'd say, look, like we can see that you're starting to get angry. We know that there's frustration building up, and we would just talk to him openly. This is when he was sort of 5 or 6, however old he was, and we would say, you know that if you go down this road, that you're going to get into trouble. So we just say, have some time in your bedroom, read a book, do a puzzle, have some, just have some time alone. That's all it is. It's not by no means is this a punishment. You're not. It's actually very ineffective as in a sense, a corrective reaction, where you say to your child, "Go to their room," and they go to their room and they just start reading a book or playing with Lego in their bedroom by themselves. That is not a helpful reaction, but it's a very helpful diffuse moment, and it just gives them time to process their emotions, get off the angry thing or whatever it might be, and we got to the point where we could just say to him, come out when you're done, when you feel yourself ready, when you're ready, come out. It wasn't like you have to be in there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Mm-hmm. It was just when you're feeling under control again, you're welcome to come out again. And so it's the door would be left open, and it's not, as I say, it's not a reaction, punishment or anything like that. And we would...
So what was really helpful is... I find this really helpful in our marriage and even in parenting. I don't know about you, but there are times when I've just had enough. I'm exhausted.
This is not the children, no? It's not
Even in any relationship, I know that if I stay in the situation, I'm going to start sinning and do something I regret. So then we've got to the stage where I will say to Richard, I think I need to go have some time out, or if it's in the evening, I think I'm going to go to bed, and I put myself to bed. So now when your kids get older, the one day my one child said to me, Mom, I think you need time out because you're not being very nice. Oh, I wanted to throttle them, but I said, you're right. And walked myself to my bedroom and went and read a book or did something or went to sleep. But it actually is a great life skill where you just learn where you are about to step over a line and just remove yourself from the situation before it gets ugly and calm down.
So in some ways you impose this on your younger children. You might require it of them, but as they get older, they will learn this. Like our child now, who's had this area of weakness, he's learned this is just a life skill. So he'll sometimes just naturally remove himself from a situation and get himself under control, and then he's back.
And it's happened now that he's older, and even when he's having friends to play, and if it's been maybe the friend has spent the night and they've had a lot of time together, and I can just see he's having something, he'll say to his friend, let's go read books, and then they'll go into the room or go sit in the lounge and they'll get a hold of the books and they read books and they just diffuse. They don't have to talk, and it's a great life skill.
Okay, so that is time out. It's quite different to the next tool that I'll talk about, just because it's helpful to do the two in comparison, which is isolation, which is a temporary loss of the privilege of social contact, social moments. So we are in a day 61 of a giant isolation lockdown. But the bottom line is, there are times when a child's behavior precludes them or requires them be isolated from, and this is in a sense as a punishment. It's a negative thing. It's imposed, and you're in reaction to something that you don't like in your children.
So, for example, I used the example the one night when we were doing questions. If you've got a very sociable child and absolutely gets fueled by people, isolation is effective when they have to be removed from a situation. And I used the example of kids playing in the pool once, and one child was jumping in on top of the children. It was very dangerous, and they were all littlies in the pool. And I warned and said, please don't do that because it's dangerous. If you do it, I'll have to take you out of the situation. You have to sit in a chair outside of the thing. So this wasn't time out, this was isolation, because she wasn't in the pool and she committed the offense straight away again. So I removed her for 5 minutes and I set a timer and I put her, and it worked. She never did that again. So it is a very helpful tool.
So it's almost always used in the context of social gatherings. This could include your meals. In other words, if you're having a child who struggles to abide by some basic rules of the table, or is unkind at the table, or something like that, that can be
It's very
isolated.
effective.
Go and eat in your bedroom, or go and eat in the toilet or in the kitchen.
No. Friends of ours, what they did is they had a plastic, one of those little plastic tables down the passage. And when their 3-year-old was misbehaving and just not eating properly and not sitting still on her chair or whatever, they said, right, because she loved, they had the thing of family gatherings and meals, and she had to go and eat at the end of the passage and eat her food there, and it worked. It really worked for her.
And it's particularly helpful if the child is very sociable. This doesn't necessarily work for a child who's naturally a loner. They'll probably be delighted. So this is where, again, you've got to find the right tool for the job. And as I say, it is a reactive, it's imposed, and it's not isolation. It's very different to isolation. And
It is isolation.
yeah, sorry, it's not timeout.
There's a type error.
Okay, and
Yeah.
it's generally used, as I say, to deal with anything in the where there's poor behavior in a group context is the best thing. So you wouldn't necessarily just apply this as a random sort of consequence through the day, just because if a child does something naughty, they immediately go into isolation. It would generally be used in the context of human interactions, siblings or one another, with children in the family, friends, social peer groups, whatever like that would be the right thing. I suppose that would be that's what it is. The next one is related to that, but isolation is the loss of social contact. But then there's a whole range of privileges, freedoms and privileges that children have, and as they get older, they change, but they can be removed. So one of the early principles we spoke about is that freedom and privilege are just that. They are a privilege. They're not a right. So they can be removed at any time in response to negative behavior. So what does that look like? I think these can either be sort of imposed right in the moment or during a debriefing moment. We'll talk about debriefing in a short while, but they are. You can either just say right there and then, okay, that toy is confiscated, or that moment to that thing, your use of the computer is confiscated, and there's an immediate loss of privilege, or as I say, it can be processed afterwards. Ideally, it should be related to the offence, but it doesn't always have to be. So a good example would be if a child, if you've asked your children to pack up their toys and come to supper, and it's a game that they love playing, and they openly disobey you on that one, you might say, right, that's it. Okay, that we agree. And don't forget, all of this has been discussed in the proactive time, the Milo time. So this is not a new thing. It's not something you have to invent in the moment. It's really helpful to look at all the things that your children love doing and love playing with, and in a sense, the real currencies of their heart. And then you would discuss this as parents, and you discuss it with your children. So this will be one of the consequences. So if in my example, if you are struggling to get your children to come to the dining room table and pack up their toys, you will have discussed this all with them and say, if you don't listen to me the first time I speak, then the consequence will be that you're not allowed to play with those toys for the next day, as an example, or the next week. How much? In other words, you're deliberately trying to impose pain in the moment, and that is the reality of it. It may sound uncomfortable to you, but that is the reality. It has to hurt. If it doesn't hurt, if the loss of privilege doesn't hurt, then you're effectively wasting your time at that point. So when I say it should be related to the offence, let's say, for example, the toys, they didn't pick it up, so they lose the privilege of playing with those toys. Or another good example would be that if you don't pack away your bike at night and it's left outside, and Dad comes home and he sees it there, then he'll put it in the garage, he'll pack it away for you, but the consequence is you may not use your bike for a week, and it's related to it. But
it's very effective for older children with cell phones, internet time, pocket money. Those are really good currencies to use for older children. Another one that we've used when we've had sibling rivalry in our family is the loss of privilege of seeing a friend. we always speak about how we team LO and how God has put us together, and we're so blessed to have our family. And friends are great, but actually at the end of it, when push comes to shove, you've got your family forever. And so we've always spoken very proactively about sibling relationships, and we've never allowed any, we've always been very strict about any grumpiness between siblings. And one of the things we would use is loss of privilege of a friend. They say if you cannot be good friends with your brother or sister, you lose the privilege of going and being friendly out there. Show me that you can be a good friend at home to your brother or your sister, to one another, and then you earn the right to have friends elsewhere.
And another one that we use very effectively, our younger two enjoyed playing computer games, and so they had a weekly allowance of computer time. It was half an hour, 3 times a week, and they loved it. It was like really a highlight for them, and that would often be one of the things that would be taken away, even if it wasn't related. In other words, if we saw behavior that we didn't like, we would go through the whole proactive thing, and we'd say, look, if we see that again, the consequence will be that you'll lose a week or however much of computer time. And it really hurt them when they got it wrong. And it's not when I say hurt them, I mean it's not a physical thing, but it's they would think twice, and it's proved very effective.
Particularly for our one child, they lost 6 weeks of computer time
in one moment.
And there was a proactive moment that was explained, and they did it, and they've never done that behavior ever again.
Yeah.
It really worked.
Yeah. And it was necessary because it was violence. It was literally hitting somebody else, and that was that they were getting a little bit prone to that. And when they did it again, it was like, that's it.
When the pastor's child hit someone at church,
that's a big no-no. Courtyard violence in the church. Anyway, so it's really important, as I say, getting to know the currencies of your children, what they love, and therefore if it's removed is very helpful. One thing I meant to mention a little bit earlier is there's, as a loss, there should never be any threat ever of the loss of parental affection.
Yeah.
So we never threaten our children, or ever, it's never a legitimate consequence to say, well, mom and dad won't love you, or we're gonna, we're not gonna be affectionate towards you, and physical touch and affection, however you express your parental love.
Yeah.
That full package must remain in operation all the time. It's never withheld. Because God never, of course, withholds his love for us. And even when he is disciplining us and working our hearts and our character, it's really important. And lastly, the loss of privilege thing, it can be defined a period of time or until you see a change of heart. So I would say, something, let's say, for example, an older child, a young adult or a young teenager, and they get caught doing something like pornography, which is a very real threat and an extremely dangerous issue if you get caught up in that thing. And I would say, that to me is a clear loss of self-control. And to me, I would want to see a change in heart, not because I'm just being harsh, but because the consequences of not seeing self-control and then giving them back the privilege. Let's say that's it, you can't look at your computer for a week. I mean, a week is a short space of time to try and regain self-control. So I would, it's not only a specified change in time. It's a period of time. It's a change of heart also. Okay, so then we come to another tool, which is probably the biggest elephant in the room, and one that often raises the most sort of ire and debate, is chastisement, or what is more colloquially or commonly called spanking. Chastisement is the biblical term, and it's the infliction of physical pain, normally with a smack on the bottom, with a hand or a spoon or something like that, to deal with rebellion. And that's really the good description of what the word means, and it's always used in the context of rebellion. And the reality is, in South Africa, it's illegal. In fact, in several countries it's illegal. But not everybody listening to this is from South Africa. So, and also the arguments for and against this are complex and hotly debated. I mean, honestly, you can find good parents who will strongly voice opinions on either side, whether you should or shouldn't chastise or spank your children. And so, I'm not going to at all tell you what to do here. I can say that when we were parenting our kids,
It was still legal?
it was certainly legal. We felt it was a right, one of the tools, legitimate tools given to us to use, and we used it only in the issue of rebellion. If there was a heart attitude of rebellion, irrespective of what it looked like, it was a hiding, a spanking, and we found it to be effective, and that's our story. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to make your call on this, and as I say, we can never advocate that you would break the law, but you at the end of the day, as parents, will have to decide how to handle this particular issue.
And we've got some really amazing Christian friends who they felt never to use, and it was when it was still legal in South Africa, they felt never to use chastisement as a consequence, and but they use the other tools in the toolbox, and they have got the most beautiful, beautiful children. So, yeah.
It's up for you to do it. All right, just to talk about it though, because it is worthwhile talking about it, because the primary argument, if one looks into the arguments against spanking, is that it's abuse, that you physically are hurting your child. Therefore, it qualifies as abuse. And to me, that's a fairly weak argument for the following reasons. Firstly, chastisement or spanking is always done for a child, whereas, and it's never against a child. You're not ever, in a sense, trying to harm your child. It's a planned response. In other words, it's decided out of the unity of parents. It's a planned response, and it's never a reaction in frustration. It should never be. I mean, if you are reacting and spanking your children out of anger or frustration or a tense emotion, then that is abuse. It's heading towards abuse. But if this is something you've planned as parents, as one of the legitimate consequences for rebellion in your child's heart, then it's not abuse in my mind. And it's an act of a loving and concerned parent and not a punishment. So if you are punishing your children, in a sense, almost trying to get revenge or exact the price of a sin, if you can say it like that, then that's not helpful. But if you love your children and are deeply concerned for them about a state of rebellion that is persisting in their hearts, then to me that's not abuse. It always aims to correct the heart and not just improve behavior. So the reality is, if you are very, very harsh with your children in terms of physical punishment, you can get perfect behavior because they'll be terrified of you, fearful of you. And so that's not what we're trying to do. You always are aiming at the use of spanking is always to reach into the heart, to correct a heart that has rebellion in it. In our experience is that it was very effective for young children, and I'm saying young as in under 5, but it would humiliate. We never used it with our children when they were older, above 5 or 6. But for those of us we've got friends who did, and it would generally be very humiliating for older children, and potentially, in my mind, unhelpful. So we often speak about it with our children, who are all now in their teens and older, and they all have had spankings in their lives, some a lot more than others because of the state of rebellion that persisted, and none of them can remember it, like not one incident. So what we see from that is that we see it as molding lifelong character, but it does not damage relationship. So we have found it was never something that got in the way of our relationship with our children. Our children never, in a sense, hated us, or they might not have liked us in the moment, of course not, but it's not like it ever damaged our relationship with our children. And indeed, we've seen the fruitfulness of it where, I mean, I look at all of our children have been very strong-willed to some degree or another, and it looked different for different children, but they were by no means just easily compliant children. And as we had to, in a sense, work out that rebellion, and we used spanking as one of the tools, not the only one, for that, we have seen all of them in there now. Some of them are, as I say, we've got 19 down to 13. There's fruitfulness in their lives. We see, for us, it really was an effective tool. And then lastly, it's supported by scripture and it's outlawed by society. So you make your call. as I say, as for us, as for me and my family, we didn't have to make the decision of whether to be outlaws or not, but I know how I would walk my road again, and but that's really up to the parents to decide. I would say this particular tool, there has to be 100% unity between the parents about this issue. It would be extremely unhelpful if one of the parents is not in agreement here. So I would work this one through until you've got conclusion, and be very clear on it. And just to reiterate Sheila's point, when I say about this, I use that word supported by Scripture very carefully. It's supported by Scripture. It's not commanded by Scripture. Yeah. So you are not being a bad parent if you decide not to use it. You're not being, in a sense, an unbiblical parent. So if you go look at, if you do a study on this, you'll see that it's just it's one of the tools mentioned, and it's not a command. And you can, and it's also not effective for all children. Yeah. So there are some children, and we've got very good friends who would, one of their children, this meant nothing to them. They would like laugh at their parents. Is that all? Like they literally like get to the thing was, is that as hard as you can hit? You know, laugh at their parents. You know, hit me harder. You know, actually, completely the reverse effect. So in this case, but loss of privilege in that. If his whatever was taken away, then it was much more effective. So, like all the tools, it's important that you would match them to the child. Okay. However, when it comes to any of the painful consequences, whether they be loss of privilege or isolation or spanking, whatever it is, always consider the context of what you're dealing with. So, what I mean by that is, the first thing to consider is the frequency of this offense. So I would say, as parents, we are trying not to exasperate or frustrate our children. So if you have a child who is characterized by good behavior and has a momentary slip up, don't rush to a painful conflict, even if it is an agreed consequence. Don't necessarily just jump in there, because in some ways you undo all the good that they have done. You're dismissing all of the good that they've done, and you are focusing on the one moment of bad, which is unhelpful. So I would say painful things should only really start coming into play if it's starting to become a bit of a pattern that you're seeing in your child, and you don't want to be too harsh in this area. Also, I think it's very important to consider the age of the child. So rebellion can manifest at any age, but I think it becomes the nature of the consequence must consider the age of the child. So, I don't have time to really expand on that much more than that. And also, you want to consider the general context of the incident. So in other words, if your child has a moment, a reaction to something, but maybe they were sorely provoked, if you know what I mean. They did lash out in anger or even in hitting somebody, but when you were to scratch a bit, you would find that actually they were properly provoked. That doesn't necessarily condone their behavior, but it would maybe moderate the way you would approach. That might be more of a conversation as opposed to a consequence, a painful consequence straight away. And in all of this, I suppose what you're doing is you are weighing up the overall character of your child to see, is this a regular thing, or is this a once-off thing? And so that you're not, at the end of the day, you want to know that you're being fair, and so that you're not frustrating and exasperating your child. And that's very helpful. Okay. Okay, so the last point on that is you can allow, I think is very helpful in terms of not frustrating your children. Always allow them, as they get older, the opportunity to discuss the case, just like you would want to discuss any charge brought against you. So don't be manipulated, but do listen to appeals and...
Very helpful when they're teens.
Yeah, because often there is reasoning. It may not be sound reasoning or logical in your mind, but there's reasoning as to why they behaved in a certain way. And you do want to unpack that. And it might mean that you still apply a consequence, but you would just have moderated yourself a bit. The whole point of this is just be fair in all of this. It's not, so you're dealing with people and you're a person, so these are not absolutely rigid things. They're just like a computer computer just going, okay, yes, no, in binary, 0, 1, 0, 1. It doesn't work like that. It's a bit different. So, right. So that was a whole lot of life happens type tools that you can use, and we will, I think in next week we will talk about some scenarios of how that can play out, just to give some more life examples. But for the rest of tonight, I want to talk about another very, very helpful aspect. Again, almost of it's slightly reactive, but it's out of conflict reactive. So yeah, life happens. All of that, in some ways, is you're in the conflict, and it's very emotive, and it doesn't necessarily open a doorway into your child's heart. It's not wrong to do it, but it's much more helpful, as I say, to do a lot proactively and after the emotion has subsided a bit.
Yeah.
So let's just look at the first of these, debriefing. So you'll notice on the right, we now have ALH, after life happens. So this is now an unpacking moment where you're going to unpack the life moment. And it might be, for example, in the car on the way home, or the next morning after an evening of disaster, or whatever it might be. You can engineer this to however suits you. It can, as I say, can be quite spontaneous. Or if you're really wanting to break into the heart of your child after they've had a major sort of collapse in moral fiber and something's happened, you need to make time in the days after that to help them process the moment. It's a very effective thing to do, to post-process, debrief. So let's have a look at what that could look like. I think you really want to take a little bit of a sandwich approach here. So praise what is good. So look at start off by emphasizing what you do see in your children, the goodness that is in them, because they may have had as I say, a weakness, a misdemeanor, or something's gone wrong, but you don't want to jump on them about that thing and sort of, in a sense, drag up all the negativity of it, but rather to say, I just love this aspect about you. I love it. And you find some things that you can talk about that emphasize that they actually are a good person, that they fundamentally are created in God's image, and you love them as a parent, and you love aspects about them. And then out of that place, in a sense of having really established a basis of love and affirmation almost, you then verbally correct what was bad. Now, this is almost like a conversational side of things. You're going to be saying, well, you're normally so much like this, and then there was this thing that happened, or you might even say, we've been working on this aspect of your character.
So well up until now.
We've been working on this aspect of your character for such a long time, and you've been doing so well, and we've been loving the success. However, there was last night, and now you've got to talk about it. You're not trying to manipulate with guilt here in any way. You're trying to help your child process the moment of their failing, and to try and coach them through it, in a sense. You may discuss how that bad behavior has offended or hurt others. For example, you might have said, actually, honestly, when you behaved like that at the group context, it was really hurtful, and it was embarrassing for mom, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't always have to be a negative thing, though. I mean, you also want to highlight the good behavior, how their good behavior may have blessed other people. You would. It doesn't always have to be a debriefing of a negative moment. I'd actually go debriefing with a positive slant is very, very helpful, and I'll talk a little bit about that in another aspect. And then at that point, you might impose any consequences, structured consequences, where you are. You maybe have decided that actually there's a loss of privilege and they're going to have to forego their computer time, and you would discuss that, help them process the frustration of that, because they're going to be frustrated that they've lost something, and you would say, you could almost commiserate with them and say, well, I'm sorry, but you chose that particular route, and it's what it is. So that's debriefing up, and I think debriefing naturally can come to affirmation, which is a very, very positive thing, and probably one of the most effective tools that you have as a parent. And this statement I think is so true, is that your children will become what is built by celebration and not what remains after correction. And it really speaks to the thing of what are you planting in your garden, and what are you planting the things that you want to see, or are you only ever correcting what you don't want to see? So what does that look like? I think you want to be very, very clear on what you are celebrating. So this, to me, the reason why I say that is that we do this very naturally when it comes to physical prowess. So if you're on the side of a sports field, you will naturally be shouting out, great shot, excellent wicket, good ball, good catch, whatever it might be. We cheer from the sidelines on a sports field very, very naturally. And or your daughter will walk out and dad will go, oh, you're looking so beautiful tonight, look at you. And you emphasize an aspect of her physical appearance or her dress or something like that. Or they draw some picture and it's like just so cute and all the rest of it. We're very quick to affirm. And that's not wrong. It's right that we would do that. But if you take that principle that you are going to become, that your children will become what you celebrate, if you're only celebrating on the physical ability, academic achievement, musical achievement, whatever it might be, artistic stuff, or physical beauty, then your child will strive towards that area of achievement, because that's how you get mom and dad's approval. So affirmation, if it's unbalanced, can actually lead to some unhelpful strivings later on in life, when if the only way a daughter could get dad's approval was to look attractive, well, what happens if she doesn't feel attractive, or has a car accident, or gets pimples or something, and then she suddenly feels she's not acceptable to a man, and her identity is affected. So affirmation is going to be one of the primary doorways into the identity of your child. So if you're wanting to see the characteristics of character, for example, like we did in that very first session, what do you want to see in your child? If you want to see good attitude, if you want to see perseverance, respect, godliness, we did a whole list of things, then that's what you want to focus on. So when you see an act of kindness and you see an act of patience or self-control, now that is the time to celebrate. You pull out the stops, you blow the whistles and inflate balloons, or however you do this verbally. You really want to emphasize the well done in life, because that is what your child will become. So they will become what you celebrate. Do it publicly in the context of your family. We would often do it at the dinner table. We would point out something that happened during the day, and we would say, John, we just love that about you, the way you did this, or Emma, when you did this and you helped here and there, and we would celebrate in conversation around the table. Another really good way would be to publicly celebrate your children in the hearing of your children, without not speaking to them, but say to, like, I would come home and then the kids would be playing on the floor, and then Sheila would say to me in their hearing, sort of loudly, this is when we had young kids, so they wouldn't know they were being manipulated. She would say, oh, you won't believe what Emma did today. And you'd see Emma prick up sort of her ears and listen into what Emma did today. And Sheila would celebrate what Emma did today to me deliberately in her hearing. And it's so effective. She just forgot what I was going to say. Okay, so it's focus initially on character, but there's nothing wrong, as I say, with emphasizing their physical skills and their talents and their gifts. It's not a bad thing. You need the balance of the two, and we have a whole session coming up on identity, where we will talk a lot about this, about how do you build identity specifically in our children.
And it's also good, if you are struggling with sibling rivalry, if you have a habit and a culture at home of affirming one another, and if someone, for example, we had 3 boys who would go play the same tennis tournament, and one of them would always come home with a trophy, and 2 of them would be like at the bottom of the pile. And it was the most exhausting time for a parent, but it was a parenting moment where we could, the ones who always lost could celebrate with the one who was always winning, and the one who was always winning had to learn how to win well, etc. And so we'd always make sure we're always affirming everyone. But what we found is that now our children someone will do something well, and they will affirm one another and say, sure, well done, that's so good. And it creates a culture of affirmation in our house, even when they haven't achieved as well as their sibling.
Good. Another debriefing moment is what we've called random rewards, which is now where you're physically going to celebrate good character for overcoming some area of weakness. So this somewhat bizarre picture that Sheila chose, I didn't understand what it was, but it turns out that it's some guy playing with his kids in a sea of balls, which I never had the privilege of doing with my children. So the point is that we are always in this random rewards are always aiming for a heart and not behavior correction. You're celebrating good character. So it's quite different from incentives in a sense an incentive was offered in advance. It required some measure of perseverance to get there, and then they get their incentive as a bonus in a sense. A little bit like if you work hard at work, you may get a bonus. It's offered to you in advance. It's not a bribe. Your boss is saying to you, if you work hard, we will pay you extra. Great. It's all easy to understand. That's what an incentive is. Whereas a random reward might be you see something in your children that you just want to, in that same spirit of celebration, really pull out the stops.
So, for example, the last time we taught this parenting course, we, at the end of it, it meant that every night we went out for a couple of hours and our children stayed at home and they were really great. So as a random reward, without telling them, right at the end, we said, we're going to celebrate by going out for pizza as a family. We just want to say thank you for just being so awesome. They had no idea it was going to happen. They weren't expecting it. We didn't mention it. And we just hardly ever go out for meals. So it was such a treat for them. And we said, this is because you're so awesome. It was random and it was good.
And so the main thing is that it's in response to something that's happening in their hearts, that you're just loving in their hearts, and you're not bribing them into obedient behavior. That's the key. This would separate this from being a bribe. It's not ever an incentive. It's different to an incentive or a bribe, and it's never offered in advance. So this is just something that is you are celebrating in your family, and you don't give it for the absence of bad behavior, but rather you use it to celebrate good character. And I would caution against overusing it, because you don't want it ever to become a bribe. So if your children know that you are, every time they do anything good, that they're going to get rushed off to the sweetie shop, then that is no longer effectively what you're trying to do. So you don't want to overuse this. We've got a couple more slides.
We've just got one more tool to go through.
One more tool to go through, so I'll be finishing a few minutes late. So the last one is admonishment, which can either be done in the moment, so this actually could be a in the life happens moment, or it's after life happens, where you are effectively issuing a stern verbal warning and you're communicating disapproval. It really has to be, the child must know they've overstepped the mark. This is not a conversation. It's strong. The emotion is a strong emotion, not a hostile emotion, but you are communicating. You have to communicate disapproval. And I think it's very clear when one should be using this. Is that it should be used for relatively minor and or uncharacteristic lapses into rebellion. In other words, this is not issued when a child makes a reckless mistake. In other words, let's say they're rushing around the house and they knock something over, or they experimentally do something that they shouldn't have done. This is not what this is a warning. Admonishment is used for rebellion. In other words, it's a heart issue. It's a matter of the heart, but your child's not characterized by rebellion. So you would say, this is where you would maybe withhold the painful consequence, and you would say, right, what you did was wrong, and it's clear that it's wrong. It's okay to say that they were wrong, and no is an allowed word in the parenting language. And you're aiming at that point to deal with a minor behavior correction, Okay, so you are shaping the heart, but generally they're characterized by good heart, and then there's a behavior lapse. That's really what you are trying to bring about. But you wouldn't do this repetitively. In other words, if your child is repeatedly disobeying you, then it's pointless giving endless admonishment. All that happens is they learn to ignore your voice.
Like their sibling all the time. And then you do admonishment. However, if it happens again, then you
We'll have a
then you have to say, actually, this is not working.
Yeah. And typically, in the interest of being very positive, you want to, if your child responds to the warning, in other words, they then get back onto track, then that's the thing to celebrate again. So once again, you want to be celebrating a lot more than you are correcting and criticizing. So again, praise and encouragement. And at the end of the day, what happens is that they start to love good out of all of this. If you look at the suite of these tools that we presented here, there's so much that you're doing in advance, in conversation, in time, in sharing your heart, in guiding your children, steering them around some things of the difficulties that they face. Not scared to impose pain if you have to, or allow natural consequences to run their course. In other words, you're not afraid to just let it happen. But at the end of the day, the balance of everything that you're doing is proactive and it's positive. You will find that your need to be reactive and negative diminishes considerably.
Hugely.
And so it's really important that you find the balance in the toolbox, unique for each child and for each age group. And from next week, we will talk a lot about how this is applied in the different age groups. So we just wanted to give you all the tools in one go, and then we'll talk about application so if you're thinking, how does this all fit together? I'm hoping that by next week you will have a much better answer to that. So I think what we'll do is we're going to land it there for tonight. So we would suggest you don't forget your couch time, very important.
Hope you've been doing your homework.
And we will put out some questions and things for you like we've been doing every week. And we trust you've had a good evening. If you have any specific questions, and I see some came through, we'll try and answer those now. But if you would like to sign out, nobody will think the less of you. And we trust you have an amazing week, and be blessed.